Like my community of Kitsillis, which is part of the Tsimshian Nation, located in BC's North Coast region, each of our respective territories are impacted by major projects of some kind. Chief Lewin and Councillor Ranson will offer their own perspective about how these impacts are being dealt with in their communities. If we were to look at a map of Canada and identify each proposed major project from the west to the east, what would we find? Is that with each project, there are interests of First Nations people impacted by each project. If we were to take a map and draw a line across Canada representing a corridor running from the west to the east, we would find a right-of-way impacting the interests of many First Nations. At the same time, many of those First Nation communities are struggling with systematic poverty, social issues, lower educations attained, and many lacking the opportunity to find and be trained for meaningful employment. How can the business interests of First Nations impacted by major projects be accommodated in a meaningful way? What does this look like? Can it involve First Nations participating as equity owners in projects and involving us as part of the management decisions? Is there an approach to environmental stewardship and the mitigation of cumulative impacts caused by major project development, and that can be established in a manner that deals with the interests that are unique to First Nations? These are the areas of work that are under consideration by the Coalition. The Coalition is not a project negotiation platform. Our work is designed to build capacity in areas of critical need. The principles of free, prior, and informed consent require investment in capacity of First Nations. We need to know what we're being asked to deal with, and we need to have the resources to properly identify the opportunities and risks for our people so that we can make informed decisions. The need for our communities to have ongoing access to this level of technical capacity has been exemplified over the last 10 years, where our communities in northern BC were inundated with requests from project proponents in the LNG sector. Proponents wanted answers and consent, while my community members wanted us to slow things down and do what we could to carefully consider the economic benefits and environmental considerations of each project.
My community is semi-remote and is not located near a highway. This presents another barrier for us to participate in the type of economic development that is experienced by First Nations who are in a more urban setting. Like many other First Nations, we have a high unemployment rate and experience the social dilemmas that are attached to being in such a situation. However, we are not without opportunity to better our lives and the lives of our people through economic development. But we cannot do it by ourselves, and we are utilizing the information and tools created by the work of the Coalition to help us get to the point of capacity where we are able to make more informed business decisions. We do not have the financial resources or the expertise at the community level to analyze potential economic opportunities at the same level as the work being done by the Coalition. Cheslata and other First Nations communities who are participating in this initiative benefit from having a forum that is non-political, where matters of business related to major projects can be discussed amongst communities from across BC's northern corridor. In the case of my community, the major projects impacting us and the neighboring First Nations in the area is not a project that is tied to the use of fossil fuels. Ours is hydroelectric. Known as the Kenny Dam, water release facility, this project is estimated at approximately $600 million. It would not only provide a substantial revenue stream for the Chislata and neighboring First Nations, it would also provide significant environmental benefits by re-establishing a more natural water flow to the Nechako River. This project is also a social and historical importance to my people, the Chislata. On April 21, 1952, the Chislata people were forced to evacuate from their traditional territory due to the flooding of the Nechako waterway by the provincial government to accommodate the corporate interests of the Aluminum Company of Canada, which is today known as Rio Tinto. The Chislata people have not fully recovered from this traumatic point in our history. As a result, our population is dispersed over a large region, and our people suffer from an identity that was lost with our eviction from our original territorial home. Our culture has suffered, and our language borders on a point of extinction. But it is the resilience of our people and the want to heal ourselves through economic and social self-reliance that drives our determination. Honorable Senators, we want to be able to heal and correct our social challenges as a community through economic development. In our view, the capacity building information and the tools being created by the work of the Major Projects Coalition provides a huge benefit to this objective. Chislata is but one example of one community in need to assess the capacity. There are many others.
When it comes to considering participation in proposed major projects, the environmental impacts of such projects are top of mind consideration for most all First Nations. I can speak from experience on these matters. Prior to being elected to council, I managed the Nakazi-Waten LNG office. Nakazi is a community impacted by 5 major project LNG proposal developments. During my time in this role, I interfaced with both project proponents and government concerning the interests of my community. Matters of environmental stewardship concerning these project proposals were carried out collaboratively with our neighboring First Nations whenever possible. These experiences have given me a first-hand perspective on the importance of a common approach to environmental stewardship. Identifying common approaches to environmental stewardship and developing a framework for the mitigation of cumulative environmental impacts is a main focus area for the Major Projects Coalition. Through the Coalition's work, we now have First Nations located in the northwest, central, and northeast region of British Columbia, sharing information and experiences regarding environmental stewardship. Accessing critical expert information upon which informed decisions can be made is paramount to the principles of free, prior, and informed consent. The existing Crown processes do not provide effective cumulative effects assessment procedures. The current environmental assessment process focuses on a project-specific impacts and does not take into adequate consideration the broader impacts of multiple projects occurring in one region.
First Nations in the north did talk about the concepts of a corridor. And in fact, part of what the coalition does is look at the impacts of where these projects are going to be. But what First Nations are more concerned about is what is the impact, the cumulative impacts on their traditional lifestyles, on the resources in their lands. And what are we going to get from it as Aboriginal people? I always remember the late George Watts, a leader from Vancouver Island, always used to say to me, "Harold, I just want a piece of the trees that are driving by my front door." And so things like resource royalty sharing, what kind of a fiscal framework are we going to create in this nation-to-nation relationship? And how does major resource development fit into that plan? These are obviously very complex issues, and there is no real simple solution. But sometimes we have to be prepared to take some risk and understand the risks that we're taking, but be prepared to make them and start to move forward. We can't wait for perfection.
Yes, what we noticed in our territory, we had some 10 proponents all crisscrossing one another, all going throughout our territory in two different directions. And we thought, why don't you hold one corridor and put those pipelines through? And I think if you would have done that way, you wouldn't have been impacting the whole territory. You would have been, one area, we had two or three proponents go through that one area of a corridor. And it would have been a lot more acceptable than the way we saw them going at it. Right. I mean, I saw some of the material that they had given my resource crew to review, and thank God we had the
just by they you mean particular corporate
proponents.
interests. Yeah.
Proponents. Okay. Some of the 10 LNG proponents that were coming through my territory, or proposed to come through my territory.
To all of my colleagues here, this is an example of why BC leads in First Nations governance, First Nations vision, and First Nations opportunities. These two groups right here are the gold standards, as far as I'm concerned, for Canada and for a new relationship that I've been hearing about for virtually all of my life, certainly when I was in Vancouver. With regards to the corridor, I was thinking about this the other night about how, we always talk about consent and sharing information and that. And I thought, if the Squamish First Nation, for instance, was a business, and I wanted to go across your land to do something, there would be no question of the negotiations that would go on and the sharing of information. And I wonder why do we have such a difficult time doing that between governments, between the First Nations government and the Canadian government, and especially on something that I believe is probably the most important infrastructure project since the railway went across Canada. Why do we have such difficulty?
Senator, thank you for the question. I think until recently it's because Canada never accepted the responsibility to engage. It was something that was put upon proponents. About 4 years ago, I was sent across the country with the Public Policy Forum to engage in conversations across the country on First Nation participation in major project development. And there's a report that I'm sure you've seen. And one of the outcomes of that was industry saying to government, you're putting this off on us. We think it's your responsibility. Part of what we're proposing with this initiative would allow Canada to support First Nations equity participation, fulfill that duty, and advance these things in a way that meets First Nation interests. There's no place to start the conversation, and this conversation has to start with Canada taking a leadership role, in my view.
Ms. Ranson, any other?
Yeah, I just want to add, when you're in a situation such as my community of Nakaslii-Witen, and you have one project, and then two, and then 3, 4, 5, all happening concurrently, and you request to have it slowed down a little bit because we're feeling we're making decisions under duress and lacking capacity, and expected to review 28,000 pages of documentation within 30 days and provide an informed understanding of that. Quite often you're going to end up in this position where communities don't have the capacity or understanding of what is being presented, and therefore they back out. And so we've always said that we need to do this jointly, to do the pre-planning of a project and not do them all at once. And so I think involving First Nations in the pre-planning of any project, the identification of location, and working in maybe a corridor approach with other nations that would like to take that approach would be very helpful. And that's all I have to say at this time.
I would just like to say that in order for us to support or to provide any kind of environmental impacts to any of the territories that we live on, we need to gather our First Nations back home and come together and provide that information, that background information of their territories. And with our coalition, that's what we're trying to do, is just gather all that information together so that we can either support each other or that we can provide information for a table such as this so we can move forward. So it's all, to me, as at the grassroots level, it's about gathering all that information so we can actually support each other.
Thank you.